Today's program will feature parts of articles and/or photographs done about the Ballantine Mansion in Bloomington. Dave Patterson was the author of today's largest article, and other works featured are by Daryl Wagner, Rachel Brewer, and Jan Striff. Patterson's article and photos appeared in the Grant County Herald-Independent on September 15, 1976. Keep that in mind when you see some of the pictures of things and how people look, that we're talking from that period of time. A lot of things have happened, but that's when it all began and taking force and trying to save the mansion. Rick Udelhoven became extremely interested in the old mansion as a 16-year-old. Fortunately, he became involved in saving the mansion just in the nick of time. Most of the program today will concentrate on the efforts to rescue and restore the mansion. Since not everything can be covered today, detailed articles can be seen and read in the Bloomington Public Library History Room. So do keep that in mind. And a lot of people's names probably won't get mentioned that were involved, but we want to call your attention to how important it was, the saving of the mansion. One of the first things that we will look at here, we're going to take a closer look at how the mansion looked before the restoration work began. And they may not show, but there are little stumps of some of the trees and brush and so on that was growing around the mansion. And also some windows were damaged or maybe broken. Things did not look very good, but this gives you an idea of what it was like there as they're starting to think about what can we do to save the mansion. Now, what we'll do next here is take a look here at Rick, and his wife was Barb at the time, and also a later picture there of how he looked. And in the background you'll see the in that other picture, when we look at it here, how the mansion looked more after it got restored. But here we'll see in this picture here, this is showing the kind of three-story banister with the railing and so on. That was always so impressive whenever you got into the mansion, and seeing it now, it's always one of the spots that gets everyone's attention, is seeing that. Moving down below here, we see Rick there and the mansion in the background, more after things have been kind of taken care of and put together. We see him looking older here. Remember, he was quite young there, and we'll mention that in just a few moments here, when he started out here working on the mansion. Now, I will be talking a little bit now for a while, and then I will be pointing out some other pictures here in a few moments. But I want to read part of an article here about the restoration. And this was written by Dave Patterson. The so-called haunted house of Bloomington is actually one of the most beautiful buildings in this area. These are the words of Rick Udelhoven, who was then 28, of Lancaster. And the house he is referring to is the Ballantine Mansion in Bloomington, which he and his wife at the time, Barb, 24, were owning. The Udelhovens purchased the house last Labor Day from D. Duncan Ballantine of Bloomington, grandson of James Ballantine, who had the mansion built back in 1876. Looking back, they noted that buying the house on Labor Day seemed quite appropriate, considering the tremendous amount of work which has been done, still needs to be done before the mansion is restored to its original splendor. Remember, this is in 1976. The Ballantine Mansion was built in 1876-77 by James Ballantine for his wife Abby and their family. James was one of the pioneers of Grant County, finding success in the farming and livestock business. The Ballantine House is a large red brick mansion of the high Victorian Italian style. Mr. and Mrs. James Ballantine and their family resided in the mansion until 1895 when James died. Mrs. Ballantine then remained in the house until her death in 1937. Since then, the house has been vacant. Rick Udelhoven has been interested in the Ballantine house since he was 16, having driven by the place hundreds of times, admiring its beauty. The Udelhovens contacted D. Duncan Ballantine in April of the previous year about the feasibility of purchasing the mansion in order to restore it and eventually make it their home. 5 months later, the sale was made. Now, we'll be looking at a few places here very soon. I just want to mention a few more quick things here. Because the house was restored and of its historic value, it was named as National Historic Site by the National Park Service, which meant that when possible, once in a while, tours could be given of the house. And that has been done over the years, especially for grade school groups, adults, when there were tours of homes. I've been through different times, and it's always interesting because I don't remember everything from the first visit. So it's always fun. The closest thing to this for the style is the Villa Louis in Prairie du Chien. In fact, when I was there, one visit in the Ballantine Mansion, Rick mentioned about the woman coming that had been at the Villa Louis, thinking that it was just like going to the Villa Louis again, because Rick has furnished things the way it should be for that period of time as the years went by. Now, the Ballantine Mansion was built with central heating, cooling system, which was a real innovation at the time, but it causes problems. That's why we're mentioning this. Spring water was piped into a 6 by 8 foot brick room where a furnace was stationed. The water was allowed to seep around quarried stone, thus cooling the rocks. Air was then drawn into the furnace room through a ventilation shaft on the west side of the house. As the air passed over the rocks, it cooled and was then allowed to rise through the house. So kind of fancy work even back in those days, you might say. As the cool air would come in across the floors of the rooms, the warm air would be forced up and out of the rooms through the transom windows above the doors. The warm air would continue to be forced up and was eventually drawn out of the house through a ventilator in the skylight on the roof of the house. This system kept the house seemingly air-conditioned in the summer. In the winter, the furnace burned up to 6 foot long logs. When air was drawn into the furnace room in winter, it would pass over the heated rocks. At the same time, the piped-in water kept the rocks wet, and the result was humidified heating for the home, which was a neat thing too at the time. Ironically, it was this central heating innovation that helped lead to the deterioration of the Ballantine Mansion. The house, being built on clay and originally started to settle, then after Mrs. Ballantine passed away, the water which had been piped in for the central heating system continued to seep in and eventually undermined the wall footings. So that was the big danger when Rick came along and looking, what can we do? We have to get those walls up, and soon we'll find out how that was accomplished here. Over the next 40 years, the walls slowly sank under the tremendous weight of the house. Thus, according to Rick, the house was used for strictly storage purposes, since it appeared that it was all its structural conditions warranted. When the Udelhovens purchased the house, 3 of the 4 40-foot long by 28 feet high, 3 brick thick north-south walls had severely settled and sagged up to 2½ inches in the middle. If the mansion was to be restored, those walls had to be lifted to their original position. The 2 interior walls were in the worst shape, having settled under the tremendous weight of the house's 3-story walnut staircase and the roof, which are suspended from the 2 inside walls. Rick tells how difficult it was to find anyone willing to tackle the difficult and dangerous job of lifting those sagging walls. Finally, the Udelhovens contacted Maurice Lister, a 73-year-old Cuba City man at the time, who's been moving houses for 50 years. He's the only guy who would try it, says Rick. And he added, if it wasn't for the contractor Lister, this restoration couldn't have been done. Now, there were other contractors that got involved, but this man had to save those walls first. And we might take a look at what was involved in a picture here now that we will show you here. When you see all these jacks of holding up lots of things there to get everything set up correctly again. And this was quite a project, a lot of jacks involved here that could hold tons of weight and so on to get things leveled up to where they should have been. And if it hadn't been for that one man, the walls probably couldn't have gotten taken care of, and it might have been a complete lost cause. Now, next we'll be looking at a few situations where people are working. I'll read just a little bit here. Luckily, Rick and Barb had a lot of help in cleaning up and restoring the house. The great majority of that help has come from 4 individuals. The previous owner, Duncan Ballantine of Bloomington, Rick's brother Jeff, who was 14 at the time, Terry Doobie, 13 at the time, and Rick Wisbaum, 22 at the time, all of Lancaster. Now, if we look here, we see a couple of the young fellows here, Jeff Udelhoven and Terry Doobie, that were helping with things here concerning the doors at the time. And moving up here a little bit, we will see where Rick Wisbaum and what he was working with there on some of the areas of the house. And we see too in a view here how desolate and barren it looks here, but this is an area that we'll see a picture later on where things really got restored back to the way they were supposed to look. Now, continuing on a little bit here, not so much more to cover. And now, a tour of, well, another thing that maybe we should mention first. Because of the fact that the house wasn't lived in for 4 years, it wasn't altered or changed. One thing that happened years ago, you might have had pretty woodwork, but it was the style for a while to paint those nice woodworks. But that wasn't the thing to really run into here. The latency preserved the original finish on the woodwork, and all the ceiling ornaments are intact, as is the cornice work. And now just a little short thing here about a tour of the mansion. The Ballantine Mansion is a large red brick house built in the high Victorian Italianate style. As one views the house from the street, it becomes obvious the mansion is well balanced architecturally. The front door is in the center of the house, and there are 2 bay windows on each of the first and second floors opposing each other. There were two chimneys on the roof which were also balanced to the eye, but one had collapsed. The Uedelhobens at the time, their plan to restore the chimney. There are a few little views here that we'll look at quickly here, but I just want to read a little bit about them first. On the south end of the office is an arched bay window. There are 32 windows in the Ballantine Mansion, and each window is 7 feet 6 inches tall, cased to 10 feet. The downstairs ceilings are 13 feet. The upstairs ceilings are a bit lower, 12 feet. All the woodwork in the house is done in beautiful hand-painted simulated graining. The woodwork runs over 10 inches wide and is up to 3 inches thick. The Uedelhobens attribute the great number of windows to the need for utilizing natural light at that time. They say the high ceilings were a sign of wealth as well as allowing for good ventilation. And one other thing here, and then we'll look at a few pictures here. If you were to stand on the roof, you'd see a great number of pine trees, which thrive throughout Bloomington, and some of those still exist yet. The Ballantines had a nursery, which is the birthplace of many of these pines, according to the Uedelhobens. Now we'll look at this was another thing there from the project here, where a lot of materials were bought in for roof restoration and that. And there's so many things that were involved and can be seen elsewhere, but at least gives you some idea. A lot of work went into this, and there were other contractors involved. Attaining a grant to get some money to help with the project did come through, but a lot of work was done, a lot of paperwork had to take place. Now over here we'll see what is the master bedroom, and you can see how ornate that looks. And here we're one of the archways and so on, how this has been more just available lighting, but you see how it's been restored and more the way it should be looking in this picture. And up here, these were pictures taken by Rachel Merkin, and showing here, I don't know if you can see all the print that would show underneath or not, but kind of the office area where there was safe, and a dining room area and parlor in the top picture. Now, so that we don't get too terribly long, I know this is longer than we usually do, we're going to talk more about what Rick has done in the historical work in the area, and what he has done here in Bloomington, and what he has done for our history room here in the in the lower level here of the Bloomington Public Library. So we're not done covering about what he has done and achieved, but we wanted you to know here, to be aware if you weren't previously, of all the work that had to go into saving the mansion. And you got to see earlier, of course, we won't show this now, but that's on our wall, one of our prized possessions here by Mike Cabley, where he did a painting showing the two dimensions, you might say, of the house, which is very nice. But this concludes what we're trying to do for today, and again, we appreciate all your attention on these things, and we'll be doing some more future about Rick Uedelhoben and the things he's accomplished.